the first people to get on board with the conversation that we are looking to elevate was Scott Blackman of the USOC. His presence there brought other people to the table and into the conversation, which ultimately led to the formation of Project Play in April. So after the April summit, which Scott came to as well, he pledged that the USOC would work with NGBs to encourage, quote, best practices in athlete development, coaching education, and sport research over the next 12 to 18 months, unquote, with the goal of creating, quote, a stronger sport environment for our country and those involved in youth sports. Now, the other day, as you may have noticed, the USTA led an announcement of 20 NGBs, which, engaging on early positive experiences, supporting, figuring out a way to support those, and that only adds more momentum to the effort. So, Suhan, thank you for bringing that together. I think this is all good. Sort of a lot of people are moving in the right direction. So I'd like to bring in Chris here. And Chris, why don't you talk about the USOC task force, where you are on that, and how other NGBs are responding.
So one of the cool things about working at the Olympic Committee is understanding where your podium potential athletes come from. And they come from grassroots initiatives. They come from all of your sports at the lowest level, getting as many kids in as possible. And when that starts to diminish as Design to Move and a lot of the research is showing in the United States, it definitely opens our ears, because where's the future Olympians? Well, they're not there if our numbers are going down. So it's exciting to take an interest in athlete development, and it's exciting to hear from our governing bodies, which is what we wanted to do. I put a write-up in front of everybody. If you dig down, it's called the USOC and LTAD Task Force. That should be in front of you. If not, I know Andrea has some extras. So we decided, all right, after the Aspen Institute, we said we're going to do something. We're going to engage our governing bodies and find out what's the next step that's appropriate for our sports. Because when you bond to battle, you get a lot farther than battling to bond. So we had a meeting, called it the Coaching Educators meeting back in June, where we invited all of our sports to come in with their coach educators or their high performance planners to sit down and talk about key topics in coaching education. And many of the individuals that, there's quite a few people here that were at that meeting. Two of the big things that you see there, action items that came out of that meeting, were that one, the USOC set up a task force that needs to address the needs and a model of what can help all of the NGBs. So the desired outcome is, how do we organize a versatile American development model, much like what hockey has, that all the different sports could utilize, and also have that kind of pat on the back that it's okay, we're all working on this together, to go out to their constituents and put this out. So as Ken talked at that meeting, Tom Avicius, who's here, talked at that meeting, Kirk Anderson talked at that meeting, and everybody wanted to hear, well, how did you gain success on what you're doing? How did you get through some of the mud with your members? How did you not push people away from what you're talking about? And really what we took away was, all right, how do we work together to see how the USOC can help with some of those resources and drive to be able to make some things happen? So that was one of the things that was asked to come out of it. The other thing that we threw out and we committed to was coming to these roundtables and trying to work at these roundtables with the others that are here to find the best next steps for America, not just the Olympic Committee, not just for the national governing body. Because one thing we all realized through talking at that meeting was we can only go so far. I believe as Tom makes some good points about physical education in our schools are starting to go away. Our governing bodies are being asked to pick up that next step with our grassroots programming. You're being asked as a sport to step in where there's not activity organized in school. It puts a lot of pressure on the governing body to do it the right way. So if we can bond, come here and talk with the other organizations that are at the table about how we do this together, again, we know we can have more success. So that's how it was kind of formed up. So our task force is in front of you. It includes myself, Christine Bolger, who's part of our coaching team, and then one of our high performance directors, Scott Rewald, and then USA Swimming, USA Hockey, USTA, US Ski and Snowboard, Bobsled and Skeleton, and USA Diving. So those are the individuals we selected from basically a pool of about 40 sports were at that meeting that we all could have selected. And we figured this is the group that's going to help us to not only talk to the other NGBs and see where they stand on different situations, but also to guide us on what they've had successes and had failures on. We came up with a vision for success, and it's really to come up with a unified statement and then figure out what the programming outline needs to be for this approach of what does success look at down the road. So we started laying out a vision of how we're going to operate as a task force, and our big goal is we started working on this in July, and we're hoping to come out by January 1st, by the end of the year, with some good tangible information. If you flip your paper over, you'll see one of the first things we started drafting, and this is a draft. Please don't put this in the local newspaper or make it law to everybody. It's not ready. It doesn't have the sign-off from the governing bodies, but this is actual transparent work in the process, okay? This is actually happening now, so I figured let's be transparent and show you all. So we drafted up a statement that talks about how age appropriate is involved and what our NGBs can get behind. And it's really long right now, and it used to be really short. We made it longer, and we're going to come back to it on our next phone call in a couple of weeks and see if we can rip it up some more. But we're drafting a statement to then go out to all the NGBs and see if we can get them behind this statement and this idea of age-appropriate and athlete development. Now, we've gone as far as Ken's been able to contact everybody at US Figure Skating, which is at times perceived as an early development sport, and gotten their feedback, and they're really interested because they've been looking at what Canada has been doing and doing on their side with athlete development. So they're very interested around this topic and not against it. Our next step is really to engage more with gymnastics, to have good conversations with USA Gymnastics, which really is the strongest of the early development sports. So we're trying to take into consideration early development as well as late development sports when you make these kind of models and talk about statements around athlete development. Because it's interesting when you get all these sports in one room. Talk to coach educators. Coach educators are normally the ones thinking about grassroots all the way up to the pipeline. High performance directors are thinking about the top end of the pipeline. Talk to the Olympic Committee, we're thinking about the elite athlete at the top. So how does this all connect top to bottom? And that's one of the interesting things that we're trying to include in these statements and in the vision of success that comes out of this, is how does this whole thing actually make sense? And how does it make sense? And we avoid some of those quicksand and those trapdoors that the Canadians and some of the UK people have had in their models of implementing them in their systems. So now another project that we're working on is the actual American model. We've all agreed that one of the biggest hesitations to adapt athlete development concepts is when you say in America it came from a Canadian or it came from somebody from another country. All of a sudden that American flag goes up, then we get really mad and we're very defensive. We are Americans and we're damn proud to be that way. So our discussions have been over the past phone call we had is, how do you make this an American model? Is it in the name? What's in a name? So how do you name these things? And I put just two pictures there of the Hockey American Development Model and the US Ski and Snowboard Nordic model that they have, where they talk about age development and what's appropriate and how do you move yourself up that path line. So we're looking at those models that are already in place, much as what Tom has at swimming, of how they lay out the age steps. We have the very long document from soccer, which is great, that lays things out in a very visual way. And what tennis has been doing and really implementing with their U10 tennis, as well as the different colored balls, the different sized courts, we've really got some great people to look at these models. But our question is, again, what's in a name? How do you make it American? So that's some of the things we're working on. The outcome of this, like I said, we hope to literally lay it out there. We're hoping to take the first step, which will ignite everybody in this room to say, how can we help? How can we jump in? What haven't you considered? I know AFERD is doing their part in putting together a really great document over the next couple months that will grab a lot of this research and put it in one place and give some great information. And we found a great way we had a meeting, which is the USA Coaching Educators Coalition now. We used to be the Coaching Coalition. We changed our name to add the word education because we really feel that that's what we can do. It includes the High School Federation, Tim Flannery, AFERD, the NCAA, which Brian's a part of, and ourselves at the Olympic Committee. We sat down and said, what are some areas that we can get together and get excited and really make some difference and bond to battle? And we're seeing this athlete development concept as one where we can all bond. So between the work at AFERD that's being done there, we can consider that research and what they're saying to make sure we have one voice coming out potentially, and we don't have a lot of different models and other crazy things coming up to confuse America. So, one of the questions that's there is, will other NGBs, adopt the development model we come up with? We hope so. We hope they all buy in, but we hope we thought about their vision and engage them enough that they can have some buy-in to the whole concept before we go out there. I don't think we'd go out there with only 10 NGBs saying we're behind it. I think we'll definitely sit down and continue to drive forward on that stuff. But then the other question that's in there is, will other bodies outside the Olympic family look to embrace this? And our hope is to find out from you all that you would, or you'd be interested in helping us along this path, because I know our Coaching Educators Coalition sees the value in us working together, because in my opinion, consistent message is what parents need. Consistent message is what athletes need, and consistent message is what coaches need. If we're all speaking the same language and saying, hey, look, you need X, Y, and Z to step on the field in order to coach. You need X, Y, and Z to be able to do the sport at the age of 9 the appropriate way. You need X, Y, and Z in order to put your child in the best position to be successful as a parent. And it's not just coming from the Olympic Committee, it's coming from the High School Federation, it's coming from USTA, it's coming from USA Swimming, it's coming from AFER, it's coming from everybody. Gosh darn it, it might just be true. So that's my opinions on where we could go and where I think we should go. And it'd be interesting to hear from everybody else if the Olympic Committee and our governing bodies bond and we come out with some ideas and some statements and a model that's suggested for the United States. How beneficial would that be to you? Where could you see it really being put into place in the real world? Is it something that the organizations would get behind, or is it something you need to be involved in right away before it goes out so you can say you're a part of it? I'd like to hear if anybody has some ideas or some opinions.
Yeah, let's throw it out. Sue.
One of the reasons I think tennis had some success is we went both ways. We went out and we talked to our providers about changing the sport, but we simultaneously went to parents, and it was having the parents go to the providers and make demands about changing it. So I love what the USOC is saying, and our goal really in working with the Aspen Institute Designed to Move is that when we're ready, maybe 2 years from now, that we might partner with the Ad Council and all come together with one unified platform, one website to go to give parents the information they need. I think they're desperate for it. I think there's 100 different messages out there and they don't know what to do. And so I think we have to come together once we have our plan formulated and let parents know, since they're involved in it and they're coaching it and they care about it.
Thank you, Sue. Any other feedback to what Chris said?
The ability to partner with other sports really helps us with these stakeholders that are playing, well, you know USA Hockey, they're just a bunch of folks making up rules. That's what they say about USTA, and all of a sudden we're doing something that says, wow, USOC's behind this, USA Hockey, USA Swimming. It really, really strengthens our case for a common sense approach to kids' sport.
Anybody else? Tim.
Yeah, well, I think what struck me about what Chris was talking about, many of you may not be aware, but for the last 10 years, an organization has existed which formerly was called the U.S. Coaching Coalition. And it was made up of the organizations Chris mentioned, which represents a large chunk of amateur sports in the United States. And we represent as a federation all of our member state associations, as the USOC represents the 45 governing bodies that they have. And of course, AFER through NASP, the old NASP, the college and university and so on. We've always had the NCAA involved, and with Brian on board, we're very excited with his leadership as where we can go, because to the point that Chris was making, we put on a national conference every year. A lot of the people here have attended that conference. We get some cutting edge stuff. I think 3 years ago or 2 years ago, we started with the LTAD. We kept it going in Indianapolis last summer, and then kept it going again this year in Colorado Springs. So we already have a vehicle in place where we can educate the leadership of the organizations in this country, and I don't want people to forget that. So it's not something we have to invent, it's already exists. So that's something to keep in mind. When we begin to sing the same song over and over to all the various stakeholders, I think we'll begin to make progress. I was telling Ken last night, it took us several generations to get in this mess, and it's going to take us maybe at least one to get out of it. but it's worth it. So hopefully people will hang in there.
I'm curious from the school's perspective,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, are you supportive of the, the draft statement that Chris and his task force have put together, and what does that mean for the school's community? And
We have some challenges. We, as a federation, are trying to educate our coaches and administrators about this, because back in the day when I played, all of my coaches understood age appropriateness. Mm-hmm. That's what they learned as phys ed trained instructors. That's long gone. That does not exist anymore. So it's up to us to educate people, and to the point where when you can sit each person down and explain to them what age appropriateness and why it's so important to understand and follow through with it, it's then that we'll get people on board. Right now, the emotion is driving things, and until we have the opportunity to educate them, things won't really change that much. Mm-hmm. I really applaud USA Hockey. Ken, educating your board was probably pretty doggone easy compared to try to educate your grassroots, but you're making progress and it's going to happen. So we buy into it 100%. It starts for us at the middle school level. We see too many middle schools being, operating as if they're the training grounds for the varsity program. And that's got to stop. So that's an area we can work at to improve on. So.
Right, sure.
Good deal.
Lawrence. We had parents mentioned as a key constituency, and we do know that mothers about 80% of the time are the ones that actually initially enroll their kids into a sport. Parents are the key consumer. One of the things throughout the conversation we've been talking as if we were going to provide one kind of sports system. I mean, at any age it would be a particular right way to do it. And I wonder if we want to consider the possibility that, in fact, at any age, we may want to have multiple different kinds of programs available, even within the same sport. And just to give a quick example, several years ago, I had a colleague that was brought into a community where there had been a playgroup-based alternative sports system produced that was developed by a local health educator who was quite anxious to have a more child-centered sport as opposed to what we had, which was the more traditional soccer programs as well as the travel-type soccer programs. And people used to say, well, his wasn't real soccer, but there was an issue that the city fathers had to deal with about whether or not they would give adequate playing field space to that group as well as the other real soccer groups. And so she was brought in to evaluate, do you get better results with this alternative program? What are parents thinking like? And what she discovered was you didn't actually get any difference in the results. But what was different and what was key was that there were parents out there who, in fact, were very suspicious of the traditional adult-led programs that were fairly competitive and drill-oriented, and would not have enrolled their children in sport at all had it not been for the presence of this radical alternative. And so what her report said back to this community was, if you care about having the optimal number, the largest number possible of kids doing this sport, you need to provide them all. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should have bad programs where kids are abused and all that. What I am suggesting is that maybe in this conversation there's room for some consideration of what would parallel systems look like that kids could even move between that would allow multiple ways of doing the right thing as opposed to a system.
Do you have any thought on how to do that and still keep it simple enough that people can get their minds around that the system can work?
Well, the only examples, I mean, the challenge we have is this, that, we've had a number of countries that have brought in a lot of these child-centered programs. I mean, we had, Ausport and Kiwi Sport, and we've had modified sports in the United States and Canada and UK and elsewhere. And the challenge of maintaining those sports has consistently been that there's been a cultural pullback to the, professionalized model of what sport is. And so I think this issue of singing the song is important, together, because you have to have some, ideologically anchored basis for maintaining people in this alternative system. But I really think it's as, I think we're used to doing this actually in market economies, of having multiple variations on a product or a service. Sport's unique in that we actually have very little range in the kind of things we offer. And it may be an opportunity to rethink that. And one of the ways may be through, at the youngest ages, through how we think about modified versus traditional systems and all that. That may not be the only way. I'm not sure we know yet. I just want to put it on the table that maybe we should be thinking about more multiple and parallel versions of the same thing.
Sharon Roherty.
I like as well. I'm happy to hear about the USOC, bringing teams together, sports together, and creating this platform. I think there is strength in numbers. But I want to poke again at something that Tom was bringing up in the last segment, which is sports organizations following through on their own rules and guidelines, age-appropriate sports. So if we say no tryouts for U12 and under, then that means really no tryouts. It's one thing for the board to say at the state, who's ever legislating it, but then that there's no follow-through. Parents don't have a leg to stand on, and the kids don't have a leg to stand on, because that is what it is in that community, right? So I guess my question here then, Chris, is can the USOC help help these sports organizations to live by the rules that they set, that they say they're going to live by? It's again great to bring them all together, but what else can you do to make sure that we're not just saying we're at the top level it's kumbaya, but there's no follow through?
Any thought, Chris?
I definitely think that there's more the USOC can do, and one of the things we talked about back at Aspen is there a way to look at coach education and coach certification as an avenue to educate coaches to be able to do it the right way. One thing that I know our organization is looking at, and we're actually rolling out to our NGBs, is our own little stamp of approval for the governing body coaching programs that meet the in Casey's standards, the 40 standards of building a quality coaching program, where we can say, hey, all right, if you're looking to meet the best practices and you're meeting those things, we're going to give you some designation that lets people know that your coaching program is of quality, and you throw the Olympic rings on it, and that way in marketing, parents see that your program of coach education has the backing of the big guys, of the big guns, in the hopes that then we'll have a better consumer looking for that stamp of approval, a consumer looking to see, is that of quality? Now, that's an example because we have a lot of NGBs that are now getting outside competition from for-profit organizations doing coaching education, or coach associations doing their own coaching education. So we're seeing, wow, it's really confusing the American public. So if we do this, it lets them know, hey, look, as long as the NGB is doing it the right way, let's throw our stamp up there. It's an example of a step we're taking to see, all right, the NGBs have said they want this, they want to do this. The rings mean something. So it's an avenue where we can step into this world to see really what can we do legally, what can we do that's going to get the American public excited. Now that's an example in coaching education. When you talk about the enforcement of coaches and programs administrators doing it the right way and not having tryouts at U10 and things like that, I feel the Olympic Committee and the rings can have a part of that. And if there's a program we can design and the NGBs want it, we'll do it. But it's going to take more than just us. Again, it's another throwback to this group that if everyone here is messaging the same thing, that age-appropriate physical literacy, which Colin will talk about very soon, if all of this is extremely important and it's going to build the better American sport experience from cradle to grave, and we're all saying the same thing, it might just get through to the American public. And you're going to arm parents who are calling out on, you're doing it the wrong way. It should be done this way. Everyone's saying this. Haven't you learned that? It's going to give those parents that power to step up and say something, which right now you really don't have so much besides saying, I read this book. Did you read this book? And now we're finding out, the book some of us read on 10,000 hours may not have been the book. So, just some thoughts there. I think we can move forward, but it's going to take more than just us to do it.
You know what? I mean, Sue Hunt, maybe that's where the ad council becomes really important, right? So rather than just the USOC talking to the NGBs and saying, hey, really, please take this seriously, an ad council campaign could say, potentially, and I'd like you to get your thought here on this, hey, parents, here's this website, here's what you need to know about what's age appropriate, here's what the league, here's what the NGBs insist on, make sure you have a good experience, here's how you have a quality experience for your kid. An idea. I mean, is that how you see?
Absolutely. I mean, the Ad Council gets behind a campaign where we want to change behavior. And you look at the bullying campaign that's out there right now, you literally watch a kid getting beat up on a bus. And what parent doesn't watch that and not want to go to the website to get information? And it's great, all the nice little work we've done around sports, and forgive me for saying this, but it's great President Obama's throwing a football on the lawn, or we're at the Easter egg roll, but I think we need a provocative campaign. The video we just showed at our childhood obesity event, about 5 years, we have gotten pickup from every major publication. Time Magazine wants to interview us today. We were on the Today Show. That spot, which isn't ready for prime time for consumers yet, was so provocative, and we need to go out and wake up a parent so they demand something different and they are educated about what it's like. You know, my idea is a mom and dad drop off their kid at the age of 8 or 9 and wave goodbye, and what's on the other side of that wall or fence is not what I think a parent would think of as the right environment.
But I would argue that most parents are actually pretty reasonable. It's just the alphas out there, the ones who are determined to get their kids, slotted into the pipeline that end up basically shaping the entire youth sport culture. They're the ones who want to create the travel teams at age 6. And therefore, we all have to sort of play by their rules. So the question is, how do you empower the moderate parent who just simply wants to have a quality experience for their kid? Yeah, Colin Hilton.
I have a more comment to Chris that, being a part of the Olympic family, we share a lot of the same approaches to getting participants and athletes and programs. One of the things I think the USOC's got an interesting leverage point that I think is a good topic of discussion is for NGBs who are on the fence of whether to adopt similar practices. The USOC is a large funding source to a lot of these NGBs, and the almighty dollar is a powerful motivator beyond just the information. And to me, I think from the NGB's involvement in creating a development model, the USOC has a unique position to be able to leverage their funding and to ensure adherence to policies that are known to be good. And they do that on a governance structure basis where they help the NGBs, but the financial motivations, and I'm always curious on down the line, beyond the NGBs, what can be done to use financial leverage for things like schools, the schools, taxpayers pay monies to have schools available, but a lot of the schools sit vacant after school because of the fears of insurance and use of those facilities, and other after-school programs are having to build other facilities when taxpayer money has already created playgrounds and fields and those kind of things. So to me, the financial leverage is something that beyond just educating has got to be a prong of involvement and use as well, in my opinion.
Right. Andrea?
This had a little to do with the topic before. Because we're in a country that doesn't have a Ministry of Sport, we're in a situation with all these different governorships. And I think if there was some way to have the ability for not just the kids or the coaches or just in general to have a place where people can go. I know when I had my USTA card when I was a little kid, when I first got it, it was the greatest thing I could carry around. Mm-hmm. And if somehow we could create whatever it is, whether it's this panel or whatever, or a Nike All-Stars, and get a card or get it information to kids in all schools, start at the very young age, because if you bring a principal to the youngest subset, obviously you're going to have more success later. And it shows the ability of, wow, sports or play or whatever it is, and they can go home, ask their parents, they can go on a website, they can contact something that says, well, if I go to play tennis, this is what I'll have. This is what I can go do. There's a lot of the grassroots kids are unable to understand where to go, and they don't think anyone cares. Yet for the ones that are super elite, if they have this type of universal card, they can go in and they have to graduate on all the way through. Like if they're on a traveling team, they have to pass something in order to be allowed to go through. It's not just about how many times, how long a period is or how many people are on a team, but it's about maybe health and wellness of that sport. If you do this X amount, do you realize what that will do to your ACL? Well, I don't know what an ACL is. Well, you might have to know that before you graduate on. I mean, when someone is going into the Olympics, when I went into the Olympics, you had to pass certain tests to get through, whether they were just physical. So somehow, whether it's 10 years from now or whatever it is, to have a place that kids, like at the Mayo Clinic, if any of you have been at the Mayo Clinic, they give you a passport. And so every single doctor in that whole universe of the Mayo Clinic, whether it's your heart, your lungs, whatever it is, orthopedic, they can log onto a website. It's the same for a kid with cancer in a certain program. Every doctor can go on that website with your universal number. And if somehow we can get a child that, because they might want to do lacrosse, but they don't know that much about it, or they might want to do another sport, or they might want to see how to qualify for something else. And somehow the legislation has to change where if you're a professional athlete or if you're on a traveling team or want to be a college player, you have to pass this to get there. I think kids would, I mean, obviously there's a lot of research to go into putting it together, but if you make it age appropriate, if you make it so you can only qualify to get your next level of card once you've passed, it's something that these kids will have a challenge, it'll be a purpose, and they won't necessarily drop out right away. It's like a video game. You get to the next level, you get to the next level, you get to the next level. If we don't make that with sport, they're not going to go to it. And so when you look at video games and why they're interested, they're always being challenged. They're always able to go to the next place.
Yep, that's true. And I was reminded that I need to remind you that we have beverages up there. Feel free to go and grab whatever you'd like. And lunch will be here at 1 o'clock. So we're going to just keep rolling through if that's okay with you. Is that okay? Does anybody feel like we need to take a break right now? If you do, raise your hand. Otherwise, we can keep going. All right, good. Peter Davis.
Tom, I'm going back to the question of, is this type of concept or system transferable to other sports and practical in other sports? And I keep thinking of the practical reality and the challenges of national governing bodies. And the term governing is a relative term within all the sports. I mean, it'd be nice to be soccer and tennis and swimming and ski association, but the majority of our national governing bodies here are barely managing to survive financially with staff and with resources, and to come in and tell them to, or not tell them, but suggest or promote that they should redesign their coaching education component, redesign their rules, restructure their competition structure, manage this and quality control this from top to bottom. I mean, a lot of the organizations are barely keeping afloat. I mean, they're in the middle of the ocean trying to keep their head above water, and then we're going to say, why don't you try a different stroke? You know, like, why don't you try doing it this way? And they just can't do it. They can barely survive as it is. And so we have to understand the reality that there's a massive diversity of national governing bodies. And it's great that some sports are profitable, but I think in the US the majority are not. And when you talk about the USOC giving money, and they're the great, hander out of money, they're giving money for high performance. They're not giving money for you to redesign your grassroots coach education program. They're not giving money for a lot of sports now because you don't even get a medal, so you're not on our radar at all. And so there's this misconception that the USOC can fund it all for a start, and there's a misconception that sports can just turn the switch and do this, because they can't. And there has to be some support and help and structure and resources provided so they can even think about doing it.
So does anybody have any ideas on how to crack that nut? I mean, for instance, in Canada, as was referenced last night, the Canadian government gave $75,000 to every NGB to come up with a long-term athletic development plan that's tailored to their particular sport, right? And in some cases it was successful, and others not so much. But is it as simple as that? Is $100,000 for each What do we need to do this? And does anybody?
Well, it costs
Peter,
a lot more than $100,000. The Canadian sports have got 75 grand. All that did was really employ a person to be responsible for it and write some materials. And it has not, well, it has in some cases, but it hasn't trickled down to the provincial sport associations and the practical club grassroots level. It hasn't, in some sports it has, some sport it hasn't. So the 75 grand is just a seed capital, kicking it off, getting it going. Costs a lot more than that to go and change the system. But the whole and that's, I think, the mistake we do is we look at other countries that have ministries of sports and they have government funding and they have sport lotteries and they have foundations. The US system is absolutely, totally based on a for-profit, corporate-sponsored model. And so, if we want to change the system, we have to not say, let's have a ministry of sport and let's do it the way these other countries do. We have to embrace the system that works in this culture. And we have to embrace sponsorship, corporate support, and corporate dollars. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. It's not going to come from the government.
Yeah, Chris.
Everything Peter said is absolutely 100% true. The Olympic Committee funds high performance. That's their #1 focus. Where you're going to get traction in America is when everybody here figures out a way to make it happen. And we find that universal access of the resources and the education for the athletes, as you were saying. How do you educate the athletes? As I like to say, how do we educate the coaches? And then how we all are saying, how the heck do we educate the parents on this stuff? So when we find a way to get is it going to take somebody underwriting an online course that we make available for free through AFER, through the Federation, through the Olympic Committee, all in our learning management system, so everybody can have access 100% free. Then our NGBs would be able to make that a part of their coach certifications because it's a free online course that you take. Does it, as the ad council said, do we have one location that has all these references and resources on it in one location that we can push Americans to? And then it links to whatever sports have contributed or have right now at this given moment. I agree with what Peter said. It's going to be really, really expensive and almost impossible to get every NGB to redesign everything they've done from the bottom up right away. But what it will do is when all of us look at what Ken has done, what Kirk is doing, what Tom's done at swimming, we all get really jealous. All the NGBs get jealous because like, you beat us to it. You had the nerve to do it and act on it. But having that backing of some other resources that are out there that can assist a badminton, that can assist a table tennis and some of these smaller groups, canoe and kayak, you're going to be able to get them to start seeing where they can chip into that in small ways. So again, it's an opportunity for all of us to figure out how does Nike get us to a round table? How do other organizations here find a way to contribute to make those things actually happen? That's where I think we're actually going to make some things happen.
Yeah, Colin.
The one observation, I think Ken and I, who went up to Canada to many other conferences for the Sport for Life, the one thing the Canadians have done is at least they have defined a model. They have embraced and put it in, whether it's the Ministry of Sport and Recreation or Sport Canada, they've defined it under this LTAD model. To me, we need to have a model that then even the lesser NGBs who don't have monies can say, here are some core concepts and things to build off of and develop from there. So to me, I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do, right, Tom, is come up with some sort of common sense approach to youth sport that can be adopted across many levels. And until we do that, we're all going to go in circles.
Yeah, LTAD is essentially an age-appropriate model. It's just this is what needs to happen with kids between the ages of 0 and 5, 6 and 10, 11 and 15, so on and so forth. I mean, the way I see it all coming together is, okay, here are the gaps and the opportunities in each one of those categories. Here are the policies, here are the practices, here are the partnerships that can scale up participation and appropriate participation in each one of those levels, right? So all of these conversations here inform what that model might look like. And then from there, each sport can sort of tailor in whatever way they would like. And as far as this project will go, in terms of its own editorial independence and as an independent broker, we'll sort of advocate for what we believe is truly in the best interest of children and communities, as opposed to what's in the best interest of the Olympic Committee or the high school community or otherwise. I mean, we're gonna, and in some ways you may be able to get there, in some ways you may not, but at least everybody will have a concept of what really is a solution for people to aim for, perhaps. So, yeah, Kristen.
Just a caution, and not that we shouldn't go down this road and not where we're going, but in talking to Valier and in talking to Norris, and when Norris spoke in Indianapolis at the National Coach Conference 2 years ago, there's been, with the LTAD, while it conceptually makes a lot of sense, and whether it's the LTAD or some of the other, the ADM or some of the other models, it hasn't been as universally accepted as you would expect it to be. I mean, their PE system is not bought in, their scholastic system isn't as enthralled, and you still have that big separation with PE, with, oh, that's sport, it's not participation. And I think there's a gap there and an issue that we need to address that Lawrence brought up, that we've lost a lot of our moderate parents. We've lost a lot of people from the sports system that could be a part of it and could be included. Because I hear from a lot of parents that say, I want my kid to be involved, but I don't want to travel that much. I don't want to do that. And one, they're afraid if they don't, they're not giving their kid every opportunity and they're not fitting in, but they don't want to do it. And we don't have those opportunities for them. And so I think there are some really important gaps we have to bridge with other professionals that don't do sport, but that do parallel things to us, because they're already doing some of that. There are camps and clinics that do inclusion games, that do the striking, the blocking type emphasis that aren't sport specific, that we're not tapping into as well. And once we do that, we start building more of our momentum a little bit faster, and some of this might actually take care of itself. I know we've talked about this, Chris, before, so.
Mm-hmm. Good. Dan Gould, you've had your tent card up for a while.
Kind of a number of sort of random comments all on the same topic. Some people might argue all my comments are random, so what else is new? But you had asked before about parents. We did some research that shows 7 out of 10 parents, and it was in junior tennis, are probably coaches perceived they're doing the good thing to help the kid develop. So if you have 10 parents come in, 7 are probably trying to do the right thing. And so your point about the silent majority and how do we empower them, I think that's appropriate. And like 1 out of 10 is maybe the parent from you-know-where. So, but that one's got a very loud voice. Second thing, I hope this isn't too controversial, by the 1978 Amateur Sport Act, as a consumer, the USOC is responsible for grassroots sports in the U.S. And maybe we need to remind them of that once in a while, even though I know the realities. But they were put in charge of amateur sport in the U.S. by Congress. And I think sometimes we let them off the hook on that. And having been at the USOC, I know why, and they've got to bring money in, and it all depends on medals. But we might come back to that. The other, when Chris was talking about having a plan, to me makes a lot of sense. We want to be careful, but nobody in America, I think this would be correct, likes top-down. Be told what to do. So one of the things we found at our institute works well, whether it's research or practice, we try to do needs assessments. So if we went to the 80% sport moms that control access and found out what their needs were. My needs are not to have to take 3 kids on one night and put 50 miles on the car to 3 different practices, or whatever it might be. And we do that partly through research, but then we heard that you want your kids to play in a safe environment. We heard that we want your kids to be active. This program is in response to your needs. And the third point, and this is a tougher one, but there's some old literature, I'm sure people in the marketing would know better, but if you create some fear in people, like here's what you need to do to keep your kid safe, healthy, etc., they need something to go to right away. It's scaring them to change, and then they don't have something to do right away. So, okay, I read all this and I buy into the model, but there's none in my community. Mm-hmm. And talking about Peter's comment about being realistic, they might be winners and losers in this. If tennis, hockey, and swimming adopt it, and sport X, Y, and Z doesn't, if this is what we think it is, they're going to attract more kids. Mm-hmm. And after a while, the other sports might go, we better get into the business or we're out of business. So, I mean, it's, controversial, but it's sort of the, so if we get some key ones doing it, mm-hmm. I think the last point, and there's 2 youth sports in America. There's youth sports in the suburbs, and there's inner city youth sports, and there, those kids are getting more and more left out. Mm-hmm. Access, and somehow we're going to have to figure out a way, and maybe that's where you pitch for more government support or foundation or whatever. It's just it's just almost two different animals in some ways, you know, how we structure it. So
They are, and our roundtable in January will be extremely focused on that population, which frankly is the most important population. The kids in the burbs who have too many sports. These are the problems of the rich, really. They're problems of luxury. If we're going to get and keep more kids active in this country, I mean, I believe the focus has to be on access above all else.
I'd always say, unless it's your miracle, your kid, then it doesn't matter. That's the most important kid.
Right, right. You know, I want to bring Brian into this conversation. Your 10 card's not up, but I mean, the NCAA is a significant player in this space. Guess what? You're up now. And I applaud you for engaging in this conversation because the youth sport environment in many ways has been reshaped by the chase for the athletic for the college scholarship, right? I think that's been the impetus for creating the premier teams, which is the travel teams. And I mean, in my book and other, there are parents of 6-year-olds out there who are already positioning their kids to try and get that scholarship. So if we move toward a model of age-appropriate play, and the whole structure and the incentive structure with college scholarships is that you want your kid to peak at age 16, 17, so they can get the eye of the scouts, as opposed to 21, 22, or at a sport for life kind of idea. What can the NCAA do to be a good actor in this space? Is it a matter of getting involved in coach training? Is it a matter of messaging at the local level? Is it, Craig Robinson at our summit said, you know what, my players don't want to be coaches. I love if they do. The ones who you ought to reach out to are the mentors. I mean, the people who already want to be teachers. So maybe schools, or the NCAA works with the education departments out there to get teachers trained in age-appropriate sports. I mean, that's just one idea. You have any thoughts on how the NCAA can be a good actor here?
I think the most important way is for everyone to know that what we're really concerned about is building bridges and being part of this movement. And so even in our new mission and vision statement within the Sports Science Institute, we took out the words college and we talked about youth. And our vision is really for all student athletes, and when you look at all student athletes, essentially, I mean, you can be talking about the elderly too, but 99% are people who are college age or under, and so that's one part of it. Coaching education is a huge factor, and actually, in 1 month we have a pilot going out with D2 coaches, and we focus specifically on D2 because they're sort of a great clinical petri dish amongst the 3 divisions. And we're not only doing the pilot, but we have a rather intense evaluation project in place to look at that pilot to see how it's effective in terms of changing behavior, not just the delivery, but in terms of behavioral change. So that's a second. With the long-term athlete development, and Chris and I were speaking early. I mean, this is something that we are going to completely support and want to be well integrated into it, and so that's part of it. In terms of the last thing, chasing the college scholarship, I just might go out and tell a very personal story because the amount of money I paid for my oldest 2 kids going to college compared to my sister, whose kids both got full scholarships at University of Illinois, and one of them played on an NCAA national championship team. She spent probably like $300,000 coaching her kids so they could get college scholarships. I pay hardly anything for my kids to go to college. I mean, that's just it's a little ludicrous at that point, but it's shifting the dynamic to what it really means to be a college athlete. And I think if you talk to most kids, the idea of actually being a college athlete, I mean, I aspired to be a college athlete. I never thought about a scholarship. Mm-hmm. And a scholarship is something that's become a perversion in all of this. And so that comes to, I don't know how we shift that debate. That's a much larger educational program with parents and coaches combined. But to sum it all up, I see us not so much, and you know, we've talked about this a lot. It's not trying to make this about the NCAA or the NCAA Sports Science Institute or the Chief Medical Officer, Brian Hainline. It's about saying we're really a partner and a bridge builder, but we think that our name recognition can be an important player in this.
And so you, generally speaking, support this draft statement that Chris put together?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me ask at the table here. I mean, look, we're not taking a vote here, but I am interested in knowing if people, generally speaking, feel good about the direction that Chris is going in with this draft statement. I mean, show of hands. I mean, if you like what you read, yeah, no, go ahead. I mean, raise your hand, I guess. Halfway up. Okay, why is your hand halfway? So we have well, I want to kind of get the sense of the table here. If you do support it, generally speaking, raise your hand all the way so I know that you're. All right, so we pretty much have 90%, and then Paul's up by half a hand. What's your half hand for, Paul?
I do support the sports element of it. I think it's wonderful, and I think we need to do good things with sports and educate people that are in the coaching community. I think that's exactly the direction we need to go in. The comment that Chris made, and coming from where my organization comes from, Chris made a comment quickly saying, well, physical education is going away in the schools and this could take the place of. I have some problems with that. I don't think it should take the place of physical education. I think it should work with physical education in some manner. I think physical education is something different. Physical literacy can be more all-encompassing of a lot of different areas. We haven't even talked really specifically in this meeting about physical literacy. But we need to be careful that it's not an either-or thing. It's something where we need to work together with different areas within the school system.
Got it.
Paul, is that an area where, through our coaching coalition, how we work together there, and we find a way where we can match up with the organization to have it together? Or do you have any other ideas of how we can have it be a together kind of thing as we go forward and look for the best way to get this out to America, not just to the NGB members, so to speak? Do you have any ideas?
No, I think the answer is partnerships, and I think we need to we have coalitions in place. You mentioned NKC before with accrediting coaching education programs. I think that is something in place. Instead of reinventing something new in that place, let's work with what's there and make it better. And I think the partnerships are already in place. Let's work with the existing partnerships. We have all the right people at the table. And so let's not reinvent something new. If it is something there, and if something needs tweaking, changing, readdressing, reinvigorating, we can do all of that. Reinventing, I think, is what Tom would say. So I think there are a lot of things in place. Let's build on what we have. So yes, partnerships.